Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 11th Gulf Intelligence UAE Energy Virtual Forum, where we'll be discussing the overall theme of the energy outlook for the year ahead. My name is Steve Griffiths, Senior Vice President, Research and Development at the Khalifa University of Science and Technology in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, and I'll be your facilitator for this session. The session will last 20 minutes, 10 minutes of lecture, and then 10 minutes of question and answer through the chat function, which I'd encourage you to use. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Faris Abdullah Al-Kharusi, Business Transformation Principal Consultant at Petroleum Development Oman, who will give a 10-minute lecture on how to accelerate digital adoption in the Middle East energy industry. Faris, over to you.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Stephen, and good morning to everyone. So it's a pleasure for me to share this short share today. Subject that's very close to my heart, and I will sort of just take it away and jump straight into it because we've got very little time. So just as a first check, can everybody see my screen clearly?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Faris. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I'd like to just do a little bit of housekeeping first, so everybody understands where we're coming from and a little bit of my background too. I have a double master's from the LSE and Cambridge University in the management and business departments. I've worked approximately 15 years in downstream in Europe and upstream in the Middle East. I've got a very international upbringing, and that has colored my view on full IR technologies, especially because of seeing the differences and how adoption across different countries, regions. And finally, wherever you are, work or home, please be safe, be aware of your surroundings, and make sure you know where your exits are and keep socially distant. All right, let's jump in. So first reflections and a snapshot of 2020. And I think it's good to give a little bit of context before we talk about full IR in general. How's the world responded to the COVID crisis, but also the energy crisis? This is an extract from GitHub. GitHub was recently acquired by Microsoft, and it's a sort of tracking of year-on-year coding development of open source Python and other languages that were developed in the open source community. As you can see, a huge spike in the post-COVID world, and that's not surprising as more developers stayed home. So that's an interesting outtake of that. And another point to share is the MENA region showed some of the highest growth globally, with some of the most strongest growth coming from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey. Furthermore, we've seen further reinforcement of earlier studies on impact on labor trends when it comes to 4IR technologies. And the oil and gas industry is not shielded like any other industry to the changes of the technological transformation. And this has been something that has been expected, even with higher technical oriented background roles, where you see engineering roles which were historically safe from automation, from data science, traditionally showing initial now threats from 4IR type technologies in their workspace. So how do we marry the best of both worlds and reinforce those traditional roles is part of the discussion today. Furthermore, it's also reinforced a further message that was those with foresight espousing earlier, which was that regardless of your background, a little bit of scripting knowledge or programming language knowledge, even on the most basic awareness level, was inducive to better career outcomes. So, the MENA region has also shown that with greater emphasis on productivity and efficiency. Individuals with multidisciplinary backgrounds are individuals who are highly sought after. So it doesn't make a difference if you're in finance or engineering, having a little bit of Python knowledge or scripting knowledge in whatever you do in your day job or your company can lead to more positive outcomes for your career. So that's just take number 3. And so when we put this all together, what does that say to us? Well, companies that have shifted away from high capex activities and tried to resist investment in what will become stranded assets, basically assets that will be hard to exploit, especially on the hydrocarbon sector, probably will have the highest future profitability and be able to resist future shocks in the market. Companies that are entrepreneurial in spirit in the region will probably also succeed. And finally, companies that develop their staff, their human resources to be more attuned to soft skills such as empathy, startup mindset, will further enhance their ecosystems. So that's just a look back to the last year. And many things have, there are many indicators in that space that we can come back to in a moment in our Q&A. But let's go back to 4IR at the core. First of all, it's good to have a definition. The fourth industrial revolution has been defined in different ways, but at its outset is the marriage of third industrial revolution processes with a network layered approach to development of the various sectors, economic sectors. And it was, the term comes from a more European, Central European, German outlook on how to marry workflows, but it was quickly picked up in Japan and other countries around the world, mostly in the OECD. And as you can see, that there's the graph on the right shares how many sectors have been forecasted to be impacted by 4IR technologies. So what are the skills that you need to develop 4IR technologies? They are historically what we would call soft skills. And at this stage, it's very important to realize that many organizations, especially in the region, are still trying to define what their human resourcing capital and knowledge management and training looks like in terms of this space. Now, there's a video embedded in this slide, and if it doesn't play for you, please, I'm happy to share it. It's just a snippet from the World Economic Forum. We can come back to it. So moving right along, let's talk about some of the technologies. And I don't want to espouse which technologies have more value in the region, because I feel like this is really defined by your sector. Certain sectors will take advantage of certain 4IR technologies at a greater pace. So without further ado, I just want to jump into how does this break down and how is this rolled out. So as I mentioned earlier, most of the 4IR technologies have taken traditional roles of the hierarchical setup of industry and the supply chain and has made it more meshed. And the goal has been and has always been to transform traditional workplace practices, both in the public and private sector, to be more predictive, to be more efficient, and to be more optimized. I was speaking to somebody in a blue chip oil field service company recently, and he said, you know, Faris, before we called it 4IR and before we called it data science and machine learning, we just called it optimizing workflows. And all of these, the hype and the gimmick around this, putting all these extra words and buzzwords into it has really muddied the waters. And it made me chuckle because it made me realize, in essence, that's partially true. I'll give you one example here from my native Oman. Is about 20 years ago, if you wanted to get your passport renewed, it would take up to half a day at one of our police stations, and it would be a very slow, tedious, paper-oriented process. But with the integration of databases, with the integration of workflows, with the integration of solutions like smart chipped ID cards, you can renew your passport day or night in 15 minutes. And it's so fast that you don't even have time to sit down or stay in queue. So that's just an example of just this very basic technology that's very customer facing. But coming back to the energy sector, I've seen over the last 3 years a ramping up of pilot and proof of concept projects, which have added significant efficiency to upstream. And this is another project that we did in PDO with conjunction with Shell. And mobile industrial ability to, industrial mobility allows you to be mobile and not have to return to your headquarters, to be able to do greater amount of work on site, wherever you are, whenever you can. And you can do that more safely than ever before. And that actually cuts out things like transportation challenges and other challenges too, in terms of moving data back and forth. And the quality of data has increased because of that. So what's the outlook? And this is very important. I want to just wrap up here is what's the outlook for the world and MENA in general? We all have to accept that there is a climate challenge and renewables are going to be part of the mix, the future energy mix. And that holistic energy mix is going to show extreme growth, especially around solar PV in the region, but probably also in hydrogen and other spaces too. So, and if people don't believe that the Middle East, North Africa has a lot to give in this space and has a lot of potential, I just want to share this renewable solar PV solar density map. And North Africa and the Middle East has some of the highest solar density on the planet. And so it's an extremely untapped potential for solar energy and renewable clean energy. So this is something that with smart grids, with a stronger integrated distribution system, can, with predictive wire technologies that allow industries to be able to predict when they will be able to harness and store that energy versus the time that they need to dispense with it, is of extreme potential. And I think that's exciting for especially the next generation of engineers and scientists in the region. But furthermore than that, with the entire sort of scenario planning and global trends that many organizations are trying to get their hands around, I would really think about other things that are beyond technology, which are where are the demographics, where are the population centers, understanding the density of mobile device power, CPU power potential. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of hybridization of technologies. And I'll give you 4 examples very quickly from the CES show in 2021. It was just kicked off this week in the States. This is a solar powered remote control. So goodbye to those AA and AAA batteries that you have in every house in the world that Samsung's developed. Here's a Bluetooth speaker powered by hydroelectric currents because of just using your shower as power potential. Razer, which is a Californian-based company, has created a COVID-friendly mask which sterilizes and also charges wirelessly.
Faris, just a quick interjection. We'll have to wrap shortly for a few minutes of questions.
Sure. And finally, here's Gentex with the a smart rear view mirror, which allows you to, with facial recognition, find out like to see if your children or whoever in the background are behaving correctly. So this is so in conclusion, it's going to impact jobs. It's going to allow for federated machine learning, which you can touch on the Q&A section. And there are companies like in the region like InstaDeep like H2Go Power, which is one is from an Algerian entrepreneur, one's from an Arab-Israeli entrepreneur who are working in the hydrogen space and the AI space. That's lots of potential. So to end this, there's a recommended reading I would suggest because 10 minutes is not enough to cover this expensive topic. The new map by Daniel Yergin and AI Superpowers. They're fantastic reads, and I would suggest you go out and get a Kindle version if you can. So with no further ado and concluding as I have on screen, Dr. Stevens, please take it away.
Thank you, Faris. Appreciate it. Very nice presentation. Certainly very interesting. We went a little bit longer than we had planned, but that's okay. We'll go with about 5 minutes of Q&A now. Let me start off by asking you a question that came to my mind, and I think it's probably on everyone's mind given the year that we've had. In this overall session, the idea was to talk about accelerating digital adoption in 2021. But in 2020, we saw digital adoption be accelerated broadly globally, and the COVID-19 pandemic and social distancing was largely behind that. I'm gonna ask you a question. Across the GCC in Oman, how did the government respond to adopting digital 4IR technologies? How did the energy industry go? How did you see that progressing, and where do you see the future happening given the year we just had?
So I would say, to be very diplomatic about this and politically correct, is I wouldn't compare institutions on the public and private sector across the GCC and North Africa. I would say you can answer that question as an individual. Was your organization scrambling for laptops, Citrix licenses, Cisco licenses at the beginning of last year? Or was your organization the day after COVID just going to work remotely? You see, you can always tell which organizations were already positioned well by how they managed that transition during that disruption. So that's just sort of a very high level question. I think that's a question to be answered by the individuals within those organizations and leadership especially.
That's a very interesting response. I'm going to go to another question because it's one that was on my mind. It's a sort of paraphrase of one that was asked in the chat. The oil and gas sector is always being referred to as an industry that can benefit from digitalization. I've seen this many times in my own context. Question is, how do you ensure that innovation is broadly adopted in the industry? Because on the one hand, digital looks very promising. On the other hand, some would say the industry is not fast enough to innovate in general. So how do you bring the two together, innovation, digital adoption, and try to get the industry to move in parallel in both streams?
So this is my bread and butter, and it's very, very difficult. I'd have to say for an industry that is being extremely blessed, the energy industry, and mostly hydrocarbon based in the region, by having huge amounts of profits over the last few decades. Unfortunately, what that has done has made it a little bit lazy or a little bit lax in terms of, maybe the supply chain sector or other sectors have been a little bit more innovative in their space in comparison. And that's actually ironic because we've got some of the brightest and most talented people in the energy industry, engineers, scientists, various individuals of the perfect background if you wanted to create startups and spin outs, basically. I would say it's basically going to change. Behavioral and mind shift changes are required. That's it. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have probably time for one last question. I was asked to be very strict on timing, so I'll try to do that. The question is related to the one we just asked about innovation, and it's related to ICT, IT in general, digitalization, the business value around this proposition of going digital. How do you convey that and project that? Because it's very difficult to get what we typically define as an ROI, or return on investment, defined well. So in a very brief answer, how would you define ROI for digitalization in the industry?
Yeah, so I spend about 20% to 30% of my time trying to capture value of different technologies. And that's started off as an academic thing and ended up as a professional sort of requirement. So I spend a lot of time with people in finance. And The reality is you can do it in many ways. You can capture lower unit cost, you can capture lower FTE, resourcing in terms of people's time, full-time equivalents. But the most important way to do that is in conjunction with the individuals who are delivering any solution. So the end users are important. They need to buy in that the fact that your technology, your tool, your solution is not just a tool on the side, it's a value-added proposition. And that's very difficult because if you say to them, this tool will make you 2%, 5%, or 10% more efficient, you have to get the buy-in before you start that process for them to agree that it's the tool that's adding the value, not them working slightly harder, the year after. Because I've seen that in the industry where an engineer will say, well, I managed these wells fantastically well this year, and it's got nothing to do with your machine learning solution. So yeah, it's a difficult proposition, but it requires some serious financial and engineering knowledge.
I think we could probably talk about that for a long time.
Yes,
It's a
yes, yeah,
question
we
that
could go on.
lost in many different contexts and energy, but unfortunately, this is all we have time for today.
All right.
Indeed, 20 minutes is just too little time to get into depth of such an interesting topic. Nonetheless, I'd like to thank Faris for his interesting insights and for the attendees in joining us across the globe this morning or today, wherever you may be. We look forward to seeing you shortly in the plenary session of the forum. Thank you.
Thank you.